welcome back. It's Christine again with the Artist Pod, and today we'll be talking about how to draw a giant anteater. As always, I'm using a Wacom Intuos Pro tablet, and I'm drawing straight into Photoshop. So, let's get arting. Alright, here is the giant anteater. There are a couple of different colors-ish. Some like darker grayish brown, and then some lighter grayish brown, kind of in the middle of their nose, with brown eyes. So we're going to get started with the darker, and then the nose is black. So always, as I'm drawing, I have, one stroke and then one in between, right? One stroke, one in between, and we build it up from there. Keeping in mind as we come kind of off to the side, it's probably angling out, right? As it comes this way, in the middle, it's going to be going straight up, so you have this angle that'll be happening as we bring it up, right? And likewise, same on this side, right? And this is almost, because of the angle, looking like it'll be a little bit underneath, so we're going to have a little bit more of it turned off this way, because the middle of the nose is really through here. So, it's going to be angling quicker on the left side than on the right as we bring this up. And just, building it up from there. This is just a sketching step to help sort out the direction the lines are going to be going. It's one less thing to think about when you're adding shadows and highlights, is what direction the lines need to go, which is why I do it. You could skip it and just jump into adding shadows and highlights, but because adding shadows and highlights can be, something you need to put some concentration into, I find it just easier to have one less step when I'm doing shadows and highlights. And shadows and highlights are really where, our magic happens. I want to make sure I'm dedicating enough time that I need, giving it the proper amount of thought to draw that out properly. Right? So just building this up. It's pretty quick to sketch it out. You just want to make sure you avoid line conflicts. We're not going to run into much, I don't think, with this color more than we will with the lighter gray that's kind of in between, because we're going to want to angle the color towards the eyes, the fur towards the eyes, to help avoid any issues. But other than that, should be relatively, and as you come to the edge of a color, right, it doesn't have to be straight. I don't have to worry about making this perfectly even. Some overlap is actually good because that helps blend the colors together. So now as we come over here towards the eyes, you want to be careful, because eyes are inevitably something that we pay attention to. So right along the edge of the eye, we want to be careful. And you can see I'm anticipating that the fur is going to come up this way and then curve down below the eye. There's also a little bit of a bulge you can see on their faces, so I'm going to change the direction underneath that bulge before changing it back. That'll indicate to us, even though it seems like a subtle difference, it'll indicate to us that there's something different, right? If I take this off, you kind of get a sense that there's a bulge. But being careful all the way around the eye, and then having it come off on the back, following this hump over, and having it swoop off as well will help give some indications of that over here as well. And then, still up and over here, because it's got sort of another bump, hump, whatever you want to call it. And then of course up the middle, where you would still have these going up straight that are going to be angling off one side or the other as they sort of twist towards their respective sides, just like we did for the nose, but now we have a lot more room to work with. And here, right, same thing as we did on the other side, changing that line direction to indicate there's a bulge right under his eye. and then having that kind of come off. I want to make sure that I've matched what I've done on one side as well, since I was apparently a little sloppy when I drew it. Right, so if we take this off, you already get the feel for where he is, which is good. And then, right, still humping that just like we did on the other side, and then same up here. Before connecting it back down. And then as we come up, it'll be much more of a gentle transition as we angle those strokes over, instead of a little bit more pronounced. Right, and then we come over and we just start angling like we did down on the bottom. That was a little long, but that's okay. And then again on the left side, having it angle out a little sooner because his face is turned. Right. And then all the way down here, we'll have, you know, this nice turn happening where, you know, you have the edge of the nose kind of dipping down, but also it changing color right through there. Again, it's on that slight angle, so it's changing it just a bit on exactly where that curve would happen. And I tend to check a lot, you know, when I'm drawing, making sure something crazy isn't happening. So I'll often pop off, you know, the sketch layer. And then, you know, now it's just a matter of basically following these lines to their inevitable conclusion to the edge. And then we have the ears, but that should be a little easier. So we've already kind of established what direction everything's going. Forehead's relatively easy because there's not a lot of other things blocking the head like there are down, you know, with eyes and nose and stuff like that. You don't have a lot of that here. Now you just sort of follow things over. Fill things in. Typically hair length will shorten back out when it gets to the ears. So that's common to see it shorten out. Just like it usually is the shortest by the nose, nose up to the eyes and that sort of area of the face. And then if it has longer hair, it'll lengthen out after that. And then it'll typically shorten up by the ears again, but not always. In the case of anteaters, their hair isn't very long. So that is absolutely true, and I'm shortening out my stroke length as I bring it up to here. Ears may be something I finish after, because sometimes it's not something I do immediately, especially because the ears are a little bit reliant on the white, or not the white, but the lighter gray. Right, so this doesn't take long. Fill this in, and then pop that off. Yeah, you already have a sense for them. So I'll do the lighter gray. Nice and quick and easy. That's just bridging the gap between the two. Right. Filling it in. Now there is a little bit of a gap here, right? Because you can't see that side. So there's that little bit where the hair, the fur, you know, is actually stopping before it picks back up, whereas on this side it needs to flow in all the way around because this is connecting in nice and neatly. There's no gap in the face where we can't see a section. We're able to see everything on this side. So here there's going to be a change of line direction as some fur comes up to the edge of the nose, and then there's a dip we can't see. Whereas here, this all needs to run together and make sense with what is already happening, right? So all of this needs to be curved to make sense for what we've already done. Even as you get down in here, same thing, because we can see all the way around, so you need to make sure that that is showing up. Somewhat sloppy, but it'll work. And then just bridging all of that together. And see, there we go. Let me pop it off. It should look more fluid than this. And then it's just straightforward, just like on the other side. Now we can just bridge the two together. And that can go pretty quick. Especially since we've already established, for the most part, the direction everything's going. This is just, you know, kind of in between two sections, so a little easier. All right. Now the ears. Again, that shorter hair again. Typically kind of coming up because we're going to have to change direction on them. Case of giant anteaters. I don't know if there's a white stripe on their ears or if it's just, I think there's a white stripe here, so, or a light gray. So I'm going to do that. Same thing on this side. Because when you look at pictures of anteaters, they all seem to have this line of lighter color, and that doesn't necessarily fully explain itself with just highlights. Right, so we bring this up to this point, and then I switch directions, so it comes down in a different way. That's how you avoid line conflicts. And then we just sort of follow the ear down. And it can go a little bit off the edge, that's fine. Makes it a little bit more realistic that the fur isn't lined up so nice and neat. Yeah, there we go. And then we would have like a black for the nose. I'm just gonna put this here. But I always do gray for black. So come up here and black for the nose. Light pin pressure as much as I can. We're going to curve it as it comes down because of that angle. And he's got his nostrils. I think I drew them a little bit off kilter from each other. Let's back up and try to fix that on the fly. Right, so this one, let's say this one kind of starts around here. Yeah, we can we can do some fixing if we need to. Okay. Now I'm going to start with the darker color. The darker of the grays on the face, not the nose. And we're going to have the light source come in from over here, above and to the left, which should put most of his face in highlight, which is what I want, which, you know, usually I do above and to the right. Typically do above and off center one way or the other. In this case, above and to the left because his face is turned just that little bit. So this will give this side of the face a chance to really be in some good highlight. Now all edges are in shadow. I'm also potentially going to need some reference for where my line transitions have happened. I can probably, yeah, take you off. Okay. So all edges are in shadow, even the side on the light source, especially considering that it's going underneath, right? So it's rounding away. So we're going to start with some light pin pressure for shadowing. Right, just this light pin pressure. And we bring it all the way under. And then we kick into highlight. There's of course going to be a deeper shadow on this side. And then we're going to do the light pin pressure down here, same reason. Even though it's on the side of the light source. So we're going to have that bit of shadow on the edge. But not a lot, because it's going to quickly go back into highlight. Once we start adding the highlights, you'll really be able to see it. And if I add too many lines, that will also create a highlight, so I need to be careful on that as well. Alright, following that up. Some of this might shift a bit as we have the ear coming up, because it's no longer an edge here. Not as much. You have almost like you do here, where an edge is running into another object, so it's not really rounding away from the light source. So we'll leave that and then continue up above the ear with the shadowing. So I'm going to go ahead and, well, I feel like it's good to talk about, I guess. So let's come over here, because here we're going to have a lot of shadowing. So all of this is in shadow. It's dropped down, it's underneath kind of this edge here of the nose. So it would have a shadow to it. This whole kind of backside. I will often do a burst under the eyes, even though sometimes you won't see it. It helps, even on animals where it wouldn't be realistic, it helps kind of ground it to us. So I will often do that, and I probably will for him too. It'll add more dimension and more depth. You know, the thing about being an illusionist is sometimes you have to break from reality just a little bit when you're translating something from a two-dimensional into a three-dimensional. That's why drawing from life is a little different than sketching using a photograph, or, you know, something like that. Is there's some translation that has to happen. And I don't know that I've ever seen a giant anteater in person, so all I have to go by is pictures I've seen. So inevitably that means sometimes there's some translation, and therefore it also means drawing in some things that you wouldn't necessarily see in real life. Now there's going to be some transition in shadow that happens above the eye here, because his eyes are going to have that bulge. So there's a transition from highlight to shadow in here somewhere. And then the forehead tends to have the most highlight, because it's got the least blocking it, and it's the closest typically to the light sources I choose. Now this, as opposed to the other side, again you'd have a dip because the face is blocking this. So, but being a forehead means it's going to have less shadowing to it. So as we get down in here, and we're sorting out exactly how far over our shadow should be, you know, it's nice and easy to start on the edge, but we're going to need to push it further than what we did over here. So, you know, bringing this in, being mindful of where that's cutting off to know where to push it up here as well. Whatever we do here, we'll need to do in the lighter gray as well. Right, and then of course all of this shadow, shadow. So the way I currently have it coming down, I think I have it coming down to here. Yeah, I feel like that's about right. Of course we'll need a runway. To add in the highlights and sort of make this line a smooth line all the way. Okay. now I'm going to finish the head, getting this loop of shadow on the head, and I'll be right back. Alright, now to add in the highlights, full pen pressure. And so that looks quite different. We need to be careful where we tie it into the shadows. So there's not a drying transition. And we're following the lines we've already done, so I'm just following these angles. So you want this to be smooth, so I might have to blend it a little bit better than it currently is. But yeah, you want it nice and smooth into the other color, or into the shadow. And same as we do it down here, right? I want to gently pull this in. I have much less space to work with over here, so between shadow and highlight. So I need to be careful over how I'm doing that. Not get too overzealous on the edges. Still easy to do sometimes, but... Alright, I'm going to get the rest of these highlights for this darker gray, and I will be right back. Alright, so I thought I'd briefly pause and talk about this sort of harsher section. I feathered in the rest of the area, but I wanted to leave at least one so that, you know, if you ever end up with a harsh shadow, you just sort of, it's already shadowed in, so you don't have to put a lot of pin pressure. You just kind of fill it in to lighten up the area near where the connection point is. When I talk about a runway, this is what I mean. Like, it'll be a nice, easy transition if you have more space to be able to taper off the shadow, right? So all I'm doing is lightly adding more pin pressure in, lightly adding more lines, and it feathers out the harshness. Even just doing that, significantly feathered out from where it was before. And you just kind of do it until it looks right. Until it doesn't look harsh, or you can't pinpoint necessarily a spot where it transitions from highlight to shadow. Even if you push it a little bit further all the way to the edge, I'm not pushing a full highlight because all I'm doing is adding in more lines. And adding in more lines like that gives you a lot of control. So, alright, so we're going to transition to the lighter color, but I think first I'm going to give a little burst over here. I'm also going to fix a section that doesn't quite look right. We're going to give a little burst under the eye. Right, light source coming from above and to the left, so I'm going to have it come all the way into the corner of the eye here. That'll help make it look like it's a little bit more forward, right? It'll bring attention to the eye, which is good. Eyes are important. I'm going to give a little bit over the eye for the same reason. Make sure that it's over the eye here too. And then maybe a little bit on its cheek. Not a lot though. Just enough to distinguish that there's like a little bit of a ridge there. And maybe taper out how much I did that. Yeah. Alright, so before we do the ears, I'm going to go ahead and do the lighter color of the nose. That's just kind of through here. We've already kind of established some line of highlight and shadow, right? We know that, you know, this is all shadow through here, kind of already did it with the other one. And there's gonna be some shadowing up through here because it's actually a dip, right? So because it drops down, this edge is still in shadow over here. All the way down and connecting in. So that's just that light pin pressure. And then, you know, bringing it all the way down. But again, making sure this is a nice even way up, so all of this also, which some of that will be our runway when we're adding in the highlights. Now up in here, we're going to start transitioning to some highlights. Because we don't want a transition from highlight to shadow to happen right on a color change. It makes the color look like it's a different color instead of that it's a different shade, a different, you know, that it's a shadow. So we're going to fill this in that shadow. And then of course we have the shadow on this side, but not as much, right? It's a much smaller area, and as we're getting down into here, not going to have it as much. A little bit through here because it probably hasn't adjusted all the way. Right, so we're going to have a little bit coming down. I want this to be all nice and even, so there's a weird little dip I have, and I'm just going to fix that. But then as we come up in here, you know, it's already in highlight, and since it's not the edge, all of this would be in highlight. So just like I did before, I'm going to do this whole thing in highlight, or the rest of this in highlight, and then I will be right back. All right, so just like before, right, we have this harsh line. So we're just going to add more lines with lighter pin pressure to feather that out. Nothing big, and it works really effectively to feather that in. Matching as much as we can with what we did down here. Now the line from one color to another is a bit harsh too, so to fix that, what I typically do is take whichever one's the lighter color, so in this case the one we're currently on, and I'm going to push it just a bit into the other one. Nothing major, but almost like what we do when I'm feathering the shadow in, almost doing the same thing here. Not full pin pressure, maybe a little bit more, but not being even, because you don't necessarily need to be, unless it is a case where an animal has a very clear cut of one color to another. But in this case, not as much. It would feather in. And I'm going to kind of feather it until it looks right. So anywhere where it's a little harsh, I'll pull that down. Other areas can stay up. And you can see that kind of blends it a bit better, which would be, in some cases, more realistic anyway, where there isn't a clear, straight color change. There's some overlapping. Again, on some animals, this isn't true for all of them. Some of them have a very distinct difference between what's happening. What color is what? Oh, I did that a little too harshly. Yeah, and then we can do a little bit of it up here, but it's not as bad up here. It was already kind of more jagged. It doesn't take much. Maybe a little bit. This won't take much either. If I can get the angle of my stroke correct. There we go. So it looks like it's one smooth transition up. Now we have the ears. So there's not a lot of space here, so I'm going to go ahead and just do the ears fully in shadow first, and then we'll talk about where the shadows and highlights would really be, because they have kind of this ring of white around the ears, best I can tell. Although there's some of the darker color too, which I'm just doing the whole thing in white, it won't matter. But just this light pin pressure, because there's so little space, sometimes I find it's easier to do the light pin pressure first, even though it adds a little extra work, right? I'm gonna basically adding another step in where I'm adding a full line of shadows before I add the highlights, but it also gives me more control as to where I'm cutting highlight and shadow, because once you add in shadow, all I have to do to brighten it is add in more lines. I don't have to put full pin pressure. Makes it a little easier to fill all the way in. So, and with less space, that's going to be important to be able to control exactly what I'm doing and where I'm doing it. Alright, so just bringing it around. This side's going to have more highlight than the other. But even still, you know, edges are in shadow, so trying to keep that in mind. Sometimes if you have a small enough space, that rule kind of goes out the window just a little bit. And that just, you know, kind of is what it is. As long as it's not that noticeable, it's usually fine. Alright, so now for some highlights, you'd have, you know, some highlighting here. Again, I'm just adding more lines, not really adding more pin pressure. Trying to stay in the middle. Be some highlighting all the way down, where that light source is coming from this side. And then likewise, as you bring this down, there'd be some highlighting on the left side, making sure that's nice and feathered in. And then on this one, it'd be more on that back side, as it comes up. Not as much on the top, but probably a little bit just on this side. Right. There we go. Now, I'm going to get the nose in. Which the nose is black, and as I've mentioned before, I use gray for black, which is tricky. So to do that, I do have to do light pin pressure, because otherwise it will look gray, and we don't want the gray to look gray. We want the gray to look black, which is not necessarily an easy thing to do. So like with the ears, I'm going to do the whole thing in shadow to make sure I get it dark enough, and then in a few spots add just a few more lines, but really keeping my pin pressure backed off. I don't like doing gray for black. When I can, I let black stand on its own, but in this case there was just enough information that I wouldn't be able to do that. And so here we are. It's just hard to sort of back it off and to make it look light enough, because you have to be careful where you're putting the strokes, how many strokes you're putting. There's a lot more consideration that goes into it when you're doing a gray for black than when, you know, you can just put full pin pressure and not really be as concerned or worried about it. I have to think a little bit more carefully about my line placements, and it's really easy to go too far too quickly, even doing this very light stroke, even with holding back all my pin pressure, because of just the deviations in, you know, individual strokes and how many lines I'm putting in a spot, or, you know, what have you. We'll fix the nostrils once we get it in too. Make sure that they both look even. Sometimes it's hard to tell in the sketch if I've gotten the nostrils quite right until I'm drawing it in, and I'm like, ooh, one is not looking like the other. But we can fix that easy enough. I think they're shaped differently, at the very least. We can reshape. We'll reshape after I get the rest of this sketched in. You know, when you're just doing lines to draw something, sometimes it turns out a little different than once you start adding shadows and highlights and actually committing to something you're doing. It doesn't work quite the same way as when you drew it out to begin with. Alright, we're almost done. This is the side of the light source, so it's okay to have a little bit more deviation on this side, but okay. First things first is to fix the nostrils. There's clearly should be a line coming in. Make it more of a slit on this side too. Yeah. Oh yeah, that looks better. And then you have that line coming down. Looks more natural now. To add in just a little bit of extra lines to give it a little bit of a highlight. Not much. I'm still really holding back my pin pressure here. So again, it's just adding extra lines. I don't want to do too much. And it is very easy to do too much. One stroke that's a little too heavy-handed and kind of can mess things up. Or one area where I put just a few too many lines. Alright. I brightened up the middle more than I did the side, so just getting this up to snuff, and there we go. So very subtle, but it's there. Now we're going to do the ears, and then it's just the eyes, and we'll be done. So finishing out the ears, going back to this brown, this grayish brown, and we're going to do lighter strokes as we bring this down. So nothing too big. I'm not putting a ton of pin pressure just like I wasn't for the nose, but it's okay if a few errant ones are brighter. What we're doing is we're going to taper off as we bring this down and inside the ear. So as I bring it down, kind of in this circle is where I'm planning there to be blackness. So I'm going to start tapering it off kind of around that, right? To do that, it's a matter of lessening how many strokes there are until there's just a few random ones, and it'll give the impression that it's going into a recess. So I just need to make sure any spot that doesn't look like that's happening, I either brighten up or bring down the strokes a little bit more. This is on the shadowed side, so this should be a deeper shadow than what's going to be on the highlighted side, but you can see how that tapers down. And do the same thing on this side, keeping the other one in view so that I can make sure I don't screw this up. Right, it's just a matter of adding in a bunch of these, light pin pressure, we're going to bring that down, but brighter than the other side, and probably further down than the other side. So we're bringing this down. This would probably still be in view. Right through here, right, we're going to have that spot where it's backing off. You can sketch it out like I've done, just understanding that you'll need to taper it all in. Right, this would connect in up here. That's where that light pin pressure comes in handy, because you're going to want that to look like it's still inside. And then tapering off how many lines as we bring this down. It's okay to have it coming down a little bit more than what it is on the side that's in shadow, because it's in highlight. And there we go, it kind of feathers in. Just fixing any spots that look like gaps. Okay. Yeah, now, the eyes are brown. Yeah, that probably works. So, I'm going to draw the pupil in, both sides. adjust it until I think it looks like it's looking at us. I'm going to do that. Okay, so I'm going to take the brown and finish filling that out, but I'm going to leave the top blank as I bring this down to mimic this ridge, right? You have the top of the eye here, and I want this line to be a close mimic of that. It doesn't have to be perfect, but you don't want to have it going this way. Same thing on this side, right? It's going to come down because that other side's coming down, and then fully sort of circling it in. This is still light pen pressure. This, just like when we did the fur, is still kind of a sketching step for the eyes. This just gets it kind of in place, gets the pupil lined out and the eye kind of in place, and then we'll add the highlights after that. Lines don't have to be straight. Mine never are. You ever hear someone say that you have to draw a straight line to be an artist? They are incorrect, because I can't draw a straight line to save my life. It doesn't matter. You can still be an artist. On this side, the pupil's kind of running into the edge, right? So we won't have to do much over there. It's just over here, making sure that we're following that down. And then, you know, like the other side, bridging that gap. Now, I'm going to use the elliptical marquee tool to make sure the pupils are nice and straight, but first I'm going to pull back and make sure it still kind of looks like it's looking vaguely in our direction, which he is, for now. Light flare may change some things, but for now. Now, elliptical marquee tool, I'm going to take it, I'm going to use it to select, I'm going to position it where I want it, and then I'm going to erase out anything that doesn't line up. And then I'm going to select it and inverse, and I'm going to draw in on the edges to help clean up that line. Doesn't really matter once we add highlights and shadows. Then I'm going to inverse it again, pull back out, reselect the elliptical marquee tool, and then drag that selection to the other side, where I'm going to do the same thing. Position it, and then erase and inverse, and fill in as needed. Don't have to follow the line. Because of the selection, you can kind of come off at an angle. And then I'm just going to deselect, and we kind of have the eyes there. Okay, now that we know the pupil is nice and straight, come in here, and on the opposite side of the light source, I'm going to put a burst of light against the pupil. Kind of like when you have a recess, right? When you're looking at like a cup rim or something. The edge of the pupil against the light source would be going into shadow, and the edge on the other side would be coming out of shadow, would be going into highlight. But then on the side of the light source, you add in that full pin pressure for the highlight. That's going to come all the way under and connect into that light, but go into shadow on the back side. And then on the edges, it's going to go into shadow too, right? So backing off my pin pressure as I come to these edges. So eyes are relatively straightforward, easy to do. And then, you know, on this edge here, shadow, because it's just like that mug or cup, right? That recess is going in, and then you have the opposite side kicking out. You want to taper this out a bit. You don't want that harsh transition, so I'm going to fade this into shadow on this back side. And then the very top of this would also be tapered out a bit where it's going into shadow as well, because the black is a shadow where the eye is casting. So we leave that in place, and to do that we need this to taper out and this to fill in. And then obviously, right, we fill in this as well, but in shadow. It's okay if it ends up a little brighter. And if the line of shadow and highlight isn't perfectly aligned, that's also fine. Right, and just filling in. Often I'll taper in a little bit more on this side, on the back side, which is fine. You know, it's clearly it's darker than what's on the other side. It's just, you know, the way the eyes would reflect. It's fine if it's a little brighter, as long as you make a distinct difference, right? I'll really sometimes fill in the eye on that side so that that back side can have some lighter. You can see how bright his eye is. Now we'll do the same to this side. However, we are looking at a what potentially would be a significant shadow over here. Right, so we're going to have some highlight coming under. I'm going to leave a gap though where it would connect into the face. And then of course you want to taper out the highlight against the pupil, just like we did before, right? And just pulling this out, making sure the edges are in shadow. I have a little bit of this in shadow. It'll be fun when we do the light flare. A little bit of burst underneath, but then, right, all of this in shadow. Just making sure that it all makes sense. Okay, now, when you're doing eyes, one of the most important parts is the light flare. So make that white. I'm going to take the elliptical marquee tool again. I'm going to come down here. Yeah, we'll do it on this side. Make a little bit of a circle, line it up wherever I think is best. Make sure that it's in the highlight. And then we're going to fill that with the foreground color, which we've already changed to white. I'm going to drag this to the other side. Now I'm going to adjust how this is going to look, but for now we're going to put it part way there. Fill it with the foreground color. Select, deselect. I'm going to move both of them just a little and see how it changes where he's looking. Now he's looking right at us, which is great. So that tells me that on this side, I'm going to take the lasso tool, and now I'm going to mimic the fur from the edge here, right? So as we come up, we have the fur and that angle, and then I would select it out. So you're left with a much smaller light flare. We could probably do a little bit more. And select it out. So it's still there, but it's, you know, blocked by shadowing. Shadows and highlights. And he's looking right at us, so there we go. Alright, so that is how you draw a giant anteater. I hope that was helpful. In the floating nether next to me, I have other videos of art tutorials I have done, and I will see you all soon. Thank you so much. Take care.